This is part two, really, of the shiur that I gave last week, which deals with the different realities. So I'm just going to recap just some of the critical ideas of last week's shiur, and then continue. What I'm really trying to say, and that's really what the theme of the shiur is what exactly is the climate or the environment of the Messianic era. That's what I will speak about. And also, a very important or very interesting understanding of how does the Rebbeinu Shalom alert everybody that the Moshiach is here. Because if you think about it, the Jews in Egypt, they were in one country, all of them, and they were with one ruler, Paroi. You see? So the Rebbeinu Shalom could defy Paroi. He was one ruler, which he did, and he brought the Makkos, and he took the Jews out of that one country. Today, however, when you think about it, the Jews are not in one country. They are spread all over the globe. The Jews, let's say about 14 or maybe 15 million, are the most dispersed nation on earth. It's astounding how all Jews are spread all over. You know, I like to joke around and say, if you went to Tahiti, you'd probably find a Jew that owns a grocery store. You know, and so on. It's just astounding, amazing how the Jews are so spread out throughout the entire world. And not only that, their languages are all different, since they're all over the world. I mean, Jews speak all kinds of languages, French, English, Italian. So we're not talking here about a commonality in language. Their dress is different, right? The way they go dressed in Italy would probably be different the way they go dressed in Afghanistan, because there was a Jewish population there, you know. And their names are different. So at least in Mitzrayim, you had all that. You know, you had they kept the Jewish names, they kept the names, the language, and the dress, and so on, you know. But the Golus of today is very different than the Golus of Mitzrayim, you see. So the question then is, how is the Rebbeinu Shalom going to take everybody out? That is the question. And this week's parsha is Nitzavim, where it actually says, even if your outcasts be at the ends of heaven, from there I will gather you, and from there I will take you to me. How? That is the question. So I'd like to deal with that idea and try to offer the idea of how it will be. But in essence, really, we have to understand what is the environment and what is the climate that happens when Mashiach comes, or actually even before. So, last week I had mentioned that there are 5 realities in creation, that the creation has 5 realities. I mentioned, you know, from top down, or from the highest to the lowest. You have Olam Haba, which, by the way, in Kabbalah is called Adam Kadmon, primordial man. That's the level of reality, which is really Olam Haba, future world. Then you have underneath that, this world, Olam Hazeh, and that has 4 realities. You have Atzilus, which the only thing that inhabits that reality is the presence of God at a certain level of revelation. Then underneath you have that, you have Bria, world of creation. Under that you have Yetzirah, formation. And then underneath that you have Asiya, which is the world of action. And that itself is subdivided into what's called the Olam HaShofel, which is the lower world, which is our world, our physical world. And by the way, that physical world, according to scientists, is 13.7 billion light years. That's called Olam HaShofel, the lower world. you see. But you have that, and then you have what's called the seven heavens, Shivim Rakiyim. But anyway, so that's it. Those are the five realities. Now, what distinguishes each reality, other than the inhabitants of these realities, is the level of Gilui, of revelation of the presence of God, the Shekhinah, the divine presence. At each different level of reality, right, the presence of the Rebbeinu Shalom appears differently. It's the same, obviously the same Shekhinah, but there's a different level of intensity of the Shekhinah, you see. And obviously the highest level of all, which is incomprehensible to us, is Adam Kadmoin, which is Olam Haba. So the presence of God at that level is beyond comprehension. And then in Olam Hazeh, which has 4 levels, in Atzilus is a very high level, and then it goes low until you get to the Asiyah, our world, where the presence of God basically is absent, and we can only discern God based on His works, what He created. But in any case, so you have that idea. Then I mentioned also that a Jew has a neshama, a soul, which has 5 parts, and each part is connected to one of the realities. So we have the nefesh, which is part of the neshama, right, which is connected to Asiyah. And then we have ruach, which is connected to Yetzirah, which already becomes spiritual, you see. And then you have neshama, which is a specific part, besides the collective called neshama. The neshama also refers to a specific part, and that is connected to bria. And then you have chayo. That part is connected to Atzilus. And then you have Yechidah, which is the highest part of the neshama, and that is connected or linked to Adam Kadmoin, which is Olam Haba. There you are. So you have the 5 parts of the neshama that are connected to the 5 parts of reality. And those are the realities that God created. Okay? One of them being the future world, and 4 of them being Olam Hazeh. And these are very important ideas. Also, I had mentioned the phenomenon called prophecy, where a person would engage in a certain activity with a procedure, and he would go into a trance, and he would see into the world of Atzilus. And that's called prophecy. Okay? And all prophets, basically, except the last ones, were able to stand in, at a certain point, it was called as if they were standing in Bria. So therefore, their neshama was activated, you see. That part of their neshama, and they were able to look into Atzilus, you see. And depending on the Novi, he would have a certain distance from looking into Atzilus. And I mentioned Moshe Rabbeinu was the closest ever to see from Bria into Atzilus. Anyway, different Nevi'im saw from different standpoints at a particular place into Atzilus. And finally, Yecheskel, I mentioned, Yecheskel stood in his standpoint was the Olam Yetzirah, but he also could look into Atzilus, but from a very far place, you see. In any case, this is what I mentioned last week. And these are really very important ideas because they give you the feel of all kinds of spiritual phenomenon. Now, all the worlds are spiritual, basically, you see, except Asiyah, which is the lowest world. So the Olam HaShofel, or Shofel, which is the physical world, obviously that's physical, which is not spiritual. But spirituality really begins at the level of Yetzirah. Okay, anyway, that's basically the summary of the last year. Now, I had ended the last year, actually, before I forget, I want to dedicate the shir. It should be for Aliyas Neshama, an ascent of the soul, of a woman, Rini Molko, Regina Bas Yosef Reuven, that her neshama should have an aliyah because of the shear itself. Anyway, now I mentioned last week a very important idea, and from that begins the whole environment of the Moshiach, and that is that the Beis Hamikdash, and there is a Beis Hamikdash L'mayla. In fact, there's a whole Jerusalem L'mayla, but there's a Beis Hamikdash L'mayla that exactly corresponds to the Beis Hamikdash L'mato. Exactly. And what's interesting is that the Shekhinah, I had mentioned two very important points. That the Shekhinah enters the reality based in the Neshama itself, because it says, V'shachanti b'seicham, and I will dwell in their midst. Not I will dwell in it, the temple, but I will dwell in their midst, which means that the entry point or the portal of the Shekhinah into all the realities is basically through the soul of the Jewish people, the neshama of the Jewish people. And that's a very important idea. Now, the Shekhinah enters into the Beis Hamikdash L'mayla, which is the upper temple, and from that, it goes into the lower temple, which is our temple, and from there it resides, and that is the Shekhinah to us. What happens in the Messianic era, by the way, before Moshiach ben David arrives, when the Moshiach ben David arrives, the Beis Hamikdash is already standing. A lot of people don't realize that. They think that, the Beis Hamikdash is built in the time of Moshiach ben David. Not really. It's built in the time of Moshiach ben Yosef. That's one of his jobs, is to build the Beis Hamikdash. In any case, that is in many ways, a very important idea. But what is the Beis Hamikdash Shlishi? What is the third Beis Hamikdash? I mentioned it is a portal of the Shekhinah to come down to the earth. That's really what it is. Okay? And so what happens is that the upper Beis Hamikdash, which is Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, or L'mayla, that itself descends. It becomes physicalized. Yes. So you're actually having the Beis Hamikdash L'mayla, the upper temple, that descends, and that's what they talk about, that the Beis Hamikdash will be built by God. It descends exactly where the Beis Hamikdash used to be, and therefore, and it remains a portal for the Shekhinah. But what is interesting is that portal for the Shekhinah, the level of intensity of the Shekhinah is not the level of intensity of the Shekhinah when the Beis Hamikdash was physical, for all the 800 and whatever years. The level of intensity of the Shekhinah in the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi is the level of Ruach, or rather the level of Yetzirah. And we have no idea what that is. We cannot even imagine what is the level of intensity or presence of God as He appears or manifests Himself in Olam Yetzirah, which is right above the Asiyah. We do not know what that is. But when that third Beis Hamikdash, with that Beis Hamikdash L'mayla descends, it descends to earth and becomes physical, but it remains as a portal, as a gate, through which God now occupies the Beis Hamikdash in Jerusalem. But what is amazing is that the level of intensity of that Shekhinah is the level of intensity that you would encounter in a spiritual world called Olam Yetzirah. You see, that's the incredible thing. So for the first time in history, you can actually feel the Ribbono Shel Olam at a level that no man has ever experienced. You see, remember, it's one thing to be able to become a Novi, a prophet, and to be able to look into higher dimensions, right? And look into what's called the world of Atzilus. which is the highest dimension of Olam Hazeh, of this world. But it's another thing where that itself descends to the earth. And then you are able to experience the Shekhinah at the level of Yetzirah. So we really have no idea what that means. But when you do understand that, there are many things that are answered. It says in the Torah, "Ve'eshpech ruchi al kol basar," and I will pour out my heart, or rather my spirit, on all flesh. You see? So God is referring to himself as ruchi, my spirit. I will pour out my spirit, right, on all flesh. What is the level of intensity of ruchi? And the answer is, we know. Because our ruach, which is the second part of the neshama, is connected to Olam Yetzirah. Therefore, God's manifestation in that world of Olam Yetzirah, right, is called ruchi. That is the Spirit of God. So it comes out that God will manifest his Spirit at the level of Yetzirah, actually in the third Beis HaMikdash. And we will experience that. And that's why the Spirit of God at the level of Yetzirah is called ruchi, you see. In fact, it says that God will appear, lo b'chel, not with strength and might, kim beruchi, but with my spirit. It refers to the exact same thing, that this is Olam Yetzirah, you see. And therefore, for the first time in history, God's presence at the level of Olam Yetzirah will descend to the earth, to our world, in Yerushalayim, and that will pervade the entire planet, which is really a very, very important idea, you see. Now, it also says, and in the beginning by Bereshis, Bereshis bara Elokim, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and then it says, and the earth was unformed and void, empty, right, and darkness was on the face of the deep. Second pasuk of Bereshis, and then it says, "V'ruach Elokim," and the Spirit of God, mirachefes, hovers over the waters. And we now begin to understand what Ruach Elokim is. You see, Ruach Elokim, in the normal pshat, is the level of intensity of God at Olam Yetzirah, and that hovered over the face of the waters, you see. But also, as the Baal HaTurim points out, the commentary on the Torah, that the gematria, the numerical value of the letters, Ruach Elokim Rachefes, and the Spirit of God hovers, that gematria, or numerical value, is the following phrase: Zuhi, this is, Ruchoi, the Spirit, Shomelech HaMoshiach. Therefore, we now see, right, that in the Messianic era, the level of God at the level of Ruach, which is really Olam Yetzirah, that will be the climate, the environment, the level of intensity of Moshiach. You see, because the pasuk, the numerical value is Ruach Hashem, right? Rachefes hovers over the face of the deep, and that is the level of Olam Yetzirah, and that's also gematria the Mashiach. This is the spirit of the Mashiach. You see, so that level really enters the Mashiach ben Yosef, the Spirit of God, or the Shekhinah, at the level of Ruach, which is the level of Yetzirah. So these are very important ideas, you see. Now, what happens when that comes about? When that happens, that the Spirit of God at the level of Yetzirah enters the earth through the Bayis Shlishi, through the third Beis HaMikdash, you see, what does this mean for us? And the answer is, this is the Or Rishon. This is the first light, or the Or Hagonos, the concealed light, right? Or the Or Mashiach, or the Messianic light. That's really what it is. You see, it is the intensity of the level of God when it is expressed as it is in Olam Yetzirah, right? When that pervades the entire earth, that is the Or Moshiach. Interesting, isn't it? You see. And that's what it means in the Pasuk, in the Novi. Kimolo Oretz Deo. And the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters covers the seabed. What is Deo? What do you mean the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God? Because that knowledge of God is the Orishon, or the Messianic light. And that is God in the intensity of Ruach. And that is the presence of Olam Haba, Olam Yetzirah, you see. So we now begin to understand what happens when the Mashiach comes. That we are being exposed to a different level of intensity of God's presence that we never had before. That means the entire earth changes radically. And we have no idea what that means. It's not only that there will be peace on the earth, and as it says in the Novi, the lion will dwell with the lamb or whatever. That's the smallest part. But there will be a level of das, of consciousness that is beyond human imagination. And now we understand something else. We know that on Shabbos we get a Neshama Yisera, which is an additional soul. Now it doesn't say in order to experience the Shabbos. We know that Neshama Yisera. Now it doesn't say Neshama Chadasha, a new soul. It says Neshama Yisera, an additional soul. That additional soul that we get on Shabbos to experience the divinity or the spirituality of Shabbos is your neshama of Ruach. That's why it's Yisera. Because normally our Ruach, our soul, the aspect which is Ruach, it's not open to Yetzirah. It's closed. In fact, all four of them are closed. And like I mentioned, prophecy opens up the consciousness, right, between each of these neshama, each of these parts of the neshama. And on Shabbos, what opens up the neshama Yisera is the neshama that all of us have, or the part of the neshama, which is called Ruach. That's what we get on Shabbos. And because we get the neshama of Ruach, right, and it opens up, we can actually experience, although we don't see, we can experience God as He reveals Himself in Olam Yetzirah. And by the way, and that's really, when you think about it, that's really what we experience. And you ever notice when Shabbos comes, for those who observe Shabbos, that's what you have to do as a condition, something feels different. It's like something happens on Friday night that is different than Friday in the day. So there's something that enters the world at that point, and if you observe Shabbos, you actually feel the difference between Friday afternoon or Thursday and Friday night, which is Shabbos. And that is because your Neshama Yisera, which is your Ruach, is now open or conscious of Olam Yetzirah. But the interesting thing about it is that you don't see into Olam Yetzirah, you see, because, so therefore, in a certain way, it's akin to prophecy. But you feel Olam Yetzirah in a mild way, and that's what you feel on Shabbos, you see. It's an incredible gift of God. I once gave a shir about the payments of Shabbos, and this is part of the understanding, you see. So we now understand what the Neshama Yisera is, right? And that's what we experience on Shabbos, you see. But when the Mashiach comes, and Olam Yetzirah, the level of holiness, or the level of the divine presence that we will experience, right, in the time of the Mashiach, and like I said, it comes through the portal of the third temple. our ruach will be open, literally, to Olim Mitzira, which has now become part of Olam Asiyah, and that's why we experience it. You see what's going on? This explains all the phenomena of the Messianic era. And that's what it says in the Torah, Umol Hashem es levavchem, and God will circumcise your heart. What does that mean? Where do these things reside? Well, the nefesh is in certain ways connected to the body, the lowest part of the soul, and it resides in the liver, because Adamu nefesh, right? The blood is the soul, the nefesh, and the place where you have the majority of blood is the liver. So the nefesh resides in the liver. The ruach of a person resides in the heart, the pump, the heart. The neshama part, the part called the neshama, resides in the brain. The chaya resides, hovers or envelops the entire body. It's not linked to any specific organ. And the yechida is not in any way connected to the body. It hovers over the entire body itself. It just hovers there because the yechida is the greatest part of the neshama because it is linked to Ilam Haba. But now it says, we see, Umol Hashem es levavchem, and God will circumcise your heart, right? But wait a minute, what is in the heart? And the answer is, right, in the heart is the residence of Ruach. So when God circumcises the heart, which is the residence of the Ruach, which is part of your neshama, He removes what's called the Zoyama. He removes that blockage. So all of a sudden, your heart, which has in it the residence called the Ruach, actually opens up. And it has now become conscious of what? Of God as Ruchi, which is Olim Yetzirah, which again is true, because that's the concept of the third base of Magnus coming down, right, and inhabiting the earth, which means that we get to experience the Ruach, God at the level of Ruach, which we now can experience because God has circumcised and removed the blockage of our hearts, which is the residence of Ruach. You see how it all fits? Because remember, the heart is the Ruach, is the residence of the Ruach part of our neshama. You see, and all of this is really critical. It actually explains exactly what is really going on and so on. What we begin to see is something very interesting, and that is that Asiyah and Yetzirah seem to merge. Normally it is Asiyah, which is the world of Asiyah, which has a certain level of intensity of God's presence, right? But the real thing is Yetzirah. But in the Messianic era, we now begin to understand the Messianic era is where the world or the dimension or the reality of Yetzirah, right, actually is integrated or merges with Asiyah. You see, Asiyah still exists. You see, and Yetzirah, the dimension of Yetzirah, actually becomes part of Asiyah. So we who are now the residents of Asiyah actually now begin to feel or to experience or to be conscious of Yetzirah. And that is why we begin to see, right, we begin to experience the level, tremendous level of God at that point in time. You see? That's really what happens in the Messianic era. You see, in any case, this, by the way, happened in Egypt. Matan Torah, or let's take a look at Yecheskel and the maidservant. The Chazal tell us that at the Kriyas Yamsuf, that at the splitting of the Red Sea, I should say, that a maidservant, which means the lowest, Jew in that sense, right? That she experienced a greater revelation of the presence of God. She saw more Kabbalistic ideas than Yecheskel HaNovi. Now, Yecheskel HaNovi is the one where we read about the Ma'aseh Merkava, the incident of the divine chariot, which is basically the fundamental structure of the whole creation, Kabbalah. Yet she saw more, which means that at that point in time, she was able to see the level of Yetzirah, just like Yechezkel. But she was even closer to look into Atzilus. You see? So even a maidservant, certainly all the Jews, right, were able to experience the divine presence of Olam Yetzirah greater than Ezekiel, Yechezkel Hanavi, you see. And really that's what happened by Matan Torah. By Matan Torah, right, then everybody experienced the first two commandments. Everybody became a Novi. But what happened is that at the Kriyas Yamsuf, which happened 7 days after they left Egypt, right, they were basically from the standpoint of Yetzirah looking into Atzilus. Like Yechezkel, that's why the Chazal refer to, it compares us to Yechezkel, although greater. But at Matan Torah it was different. Because when God gave two commandments, right, he gave it to the Jews directly. Every Jew experienced God the exact same way Moshe Rabbeinu experienced God, which is unbelievable. Why? Because the Torah can only be given to an individual that can see into Atzilus, but literally right up to the gate of Atzilus, just like Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Torah cannot be distorted. So it has to have the clearest vision into the divinity of the Torah. Therefore, a Jew that at Matan Torah experienced God directly for the first two commandments, right? I am the Lord your God that took you out of Egypt, and you shall have no other God before me. They actually experienced those two mitzvahs at the level of Nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu, which means that they looked into Atzilus right at the gate of Atzilus. I mean, standing in Bria, looking into Atzilus. Could you believe this? And of course, what happened? They all died. So God had to revive them. But we now see that the Jews at Matan Torah experienced, right, that level of intensity, which was beyond belief. But that is not the same as the Messianic era. Why? Because in the Messianic era, so in Matan Torah, at the giving of the Torah, right, they were still in Olam Asiyah, except they were able to have an incredible vision of standing in Bria, like Moshe Rabbeinu, and looking right into Atzilus. However, in the Messianic era, it's much greater. Why? Because then Yetzirah, or the level of God as he is in Yetzirah, will actually come down to Asiyah. Actually come down. So you're not having a vision and you're not going into a trance. You are actually experiencing God as he appears in that level, which is a spiritual dimension, which is beyond belief. You see. Now, why does God do that? Because he just doesn't want to take a Jew and begin to take him into a different dimension. What he does is he combines the Shekhinah at the level of Olam Yetzirah, combines it with Olam Asiyah, and we actually, in this world, begins to experience God in many ways just like the angels, you see. So we begin to realize something which is incredible, that what happens in the Messianic era is something which we cannot comprehend, because we're talking about understanding God and experiencing God in a way which nobody ever experienced, because we actually experience Yetzirah, right, in Asiyah itself, you see. Because the world of Yetzirah, the Shekhinah of Yetzirah, divine presence, actually descends to Asiyah. Now we have no idea what that means. And that is what you begin to understand why the Messianic era is something that we cannot begin to imagine. Because like I say, we are actually seeing and experiencing a spiritual world actually while we are physical. You see. So this is a very, very important idea. We now have some type of a handle on what will be, you see, in the Messianic era. Now that we understand this, we can understand something else. When the Rebbeinu Shalom will want to begin the Messianic process, you see, which means that because the Messianic process must have a preparation before it, which I've mentioned many times, and so on, which I'll go over later. But right now, when finally the Jews, in Nitzavim, which is today's Parsha, when it says that even if you're outcast, be at the ends of heaven, from there I will gather you, and from there I will take you to me. What is that? What that is that all of a sudden, every Jewish person, his neshama, will experience the entry of the Shekhinah through his neshama. Yes. And there will be a consciousness awakening of which we cannot even begin to comprehend. It's like waking up from a deep sleep, you see. And since Nisham means from the Golus, you see, that God, it's not a problem that all the Jews are spread throughout the planet, because every Jew has an neshama in him. What God has to do is to open up the neshama of the Jew, because remember, the neshama itself is the portal of the Shekhinah into the Bria, into the whole creation, you see. So what all God has to do is not just meet everybody where they live. All he has to do is to open up, like God will circumcise their heart, which means he will allow them to experience God through himself. And that will awaken everybody, you see. And that's basically how it's going to happen. Now, once everybody is woken up, so to speak, then of course everybody's going to leave and go to Eretz Yisrael, you see. And as a collective, they will now be able to go. You're going to have the Bayis Shlishi, the third Beis Hamikdash will descend, could be at the same time that they awaken, and everybody will go to Eretz Yisrael and gather together, because God has now appeared to every Jew again, right, in his capacity or his intensity of Ruach, you see. So there, everybody will wake up in that sense, will be conscious of God through their neshama. And since the neshama is in them, therefore every Jew, no matter where he is, will be gathered. All of a sudden, he will be gathered away from the Goyim. That's what Yikabetzcha means. God will gather the Jews. He will separate the Jews from the Goyim with this incredible consciousness, and Yikochecho, and he will take you, which means you will now go to Eretz Yisrael. This is a very, very important idea. So in a certain sense, we now have a feel of how this is going to happen, you see. Is each Jew will now be conscious of God in his own neshama, and therefore he will then go to Eretz Yisrael. All the Jews will gather in Eretz Yisrael, and this will be in the time of Moshiach ben Yosef, which will be before Moshiach ben David, you see. Now, in Moshiach ben David's time, we will have an incredible pervasiveness of God as he is in the Olam Yetzirah, tremendous amount all over the planet, and there will be the Orishan, the Messianic light, and of course, once again, all Jews will now live in Eretz Yisrael. So we now have an understanding, you see. Now this is the Messianic era, you see. What happens after the Messianic era? The Messianic era ends in the year 6000, which in a week, whatever, right, means there will be 218 years to go. The English year 2240 is the year 6000, right? So as a result of that, right, the Messianic era will end in the year 6000. And then there will begin what's called Chad Chorov, 1,000 years of desolation, which means that the concept of zikuch, which I've mentioned many times, that God will transform the physical world, retransform it back into Yetzirah. Exactly. In other words, zikuch means to purify. Once 6,000 years have passed, and this is after the Messianic era, then God will purify this world, Asiyah, which means that God will remove the materialism, the Geshem, and Olam Asiyah will become Yetzirah. You see the difference? So the Messianic era is when we live in Asiyah and we experience Yetzirah, and this is the preparation for the 7,000th year, from 6 to 7, where the entire world of Asiyah, which is the entire physical universe, will turn into Olam Yetzirah, which is a completely spiritual domain. And that will be our world. And then from 7,000 to 8,000, Olam Yetzirah, where we now reside, will turn into Bria, which is a totally different spiritual world, much greater than Yetzirah, which is infinitely greater than Asiyah, you see. Now, from 8 to 9, right, then the world of Bria will turn into Atzilus, which is a world or a dimension which we cannot even begin to understand. It is the highest level of Atzilus, which is the highest level of the manifestation of the Shekhinah in Olam Hazeh, in this world. So it takes 3,000 years, from 6,000 to 7,000, 7,000 to 8,000, 8,000 to 9,000, and the world slowly retransforms from a physical world into a spiritual, and then it climbs even in the spiritual levels, you see. And then in the beginning of 9,001, that begins Olam Haba, the future world. And Olam Haba is something that is not comprehensible, because the world, the whole creation changes into a world where God will manifest himself in a way which is beyond belief. Everything is different. That's why we cannot even begin to imagine what Olam Haba is, and it begins in the year 9001. So you now begin to see the evolution, you see? And you understand now what the Messianic era is. The Messianic era, you see, so the first 5,782, which we're about to enter, we are means our entire endeavor, right, is to remove the Zoyama. That's really what it's all about. See, minus the first 6 hours of Adam Rishon. But when he sinned and he introduced the Zoyama, which is the projection of Tumah, defilement of the Satan, so that world of Zoyama became integrated with the physical world, which I had spoken about. So that's what we've been doing for thousands of years. The Messianic era is the merger of Yetzirah, the level of God in that world, with Asiyah, where we are actually living in Asiyah, and we experience the divine, incredible spiritual world of Yetzirah, which is the Messianic light. You see? And then that's until the end of 6,000. Then we begin to go and retransform. The spiritual world itself is transformed. You see, from Yetzirah to Bria, from Bria to Atzilus, and then in the 9,000th year, Atzilus will become Adam Kadmon, which is primordial man, which is Olam Haba. That type of reality, we have no idea what that means. You see, so you now see what's called the panorama. You now understand what we are doing, and you will understand the stages of when it occurs. You also understand what the Messianic era really is a merge of Yetzirah and Asiyah to begin the preparation of inhabiting a completely spiritual world, which is Olam Yetzirah, right? And that changes itself. As I said, where God pervades it at different levels of intensity. And we have no idea even what the Messianic era is in terms of the divine presence, Shekhinah intensity, let alone to understand what the upper worlds are. The only one who knows what the upper worlds are, really, in full, is the Malachim, or the angels, because they live in that dimension. We, however, who are confined to Asiya, we have no idea really what any of these things are. So you now have a good understanding of what's called the overview, the outline of the totality of creation. And like I say, at each level, our work was different. In the first 6 hours of creation, Adam, right, was an Olam Yetzirah. So his job, right, was to do the mitzvah of not eating from the tree, and then he would have changed Yetzirah into Bria. So he would have started the process at a much higher level, where there wouldn't be an Asiya with a Zoyama. But once he sinned, so he introduced Tumah, defilement, satanic defilement, and the world became defiled. It's called the Yetzer Hara and so on. So for thousands of years, since Adam Harishon, which is 5,782 years, we've been trying to rid the world of the Zoyama. See? Now, after that, and hopefully this year he will come, because it's the year of Shemitah, as I mentioned, right? So the Moshiach will come, right? And he will remove the Zoyama. And now you understand why there's no Satan. How does the Moshiach ben David kill the Satan? Or rather, why? And the answer is because the Satan can only exist in the world that's only Asiya, this world. But once the divine presence is revealed, as he is revealed in Yetzirah, which is the world, the next world after us, then the Satan does not exist. He is killed, because he cannot exist in a world which is pure spirituality. And that is why Moshiach ben David kills, or I should say removes, the Satan. And there is no defilement, you see, and therefore there's no tumah. You see, which is incredible when you think about that. There's no tumah, right? There's no death. There's no disease, because all death and disease is the result of the tumah, the zoyama invading the physical body and ultimately causing sickness and death and decomposition and so on. But in any case, you now understand why the Satan dies. Because the Satan cannot exist in a world that has Yetzirah mixed in with Asiya. You see? Because in essence, the Messianic era is the same type of era as Adam Harishon, the first man, was before the Chet. So that's really what the Messianic era is. We now return to a level that Adam Harishon lived in before he sinned. You see? Which was a level of Yetzirah, you see? And that's what he lived in. We, however, made it much worse by bringing the Zoyama into this world. So we got to get rid of it. You see? So if you think about that, the Messianic era is what's called the beginning preparation for the transformation, the retransformation of the world from a physical to a spiritual entity by not only the removal of Zoyama, which is the defilement or pollution to the Satan, but it's also the beginning of the purification of spirituality itself, you see. That's really what the Messianic era is all about. And the Messianic era, like I say, is so different even from our world, you know. And just to give you an example, you know, how different can it be? And I can give you a parallel. Could you imagine a person that lived, right? Somebody that lived in the year 1240. He's primitive compared to one today. Imagine somebody lives in the world in the year 1240, right? Could you imagine if you took this person and you brought him to 2021? What would he do? He'd have a heart attack. He could never assimilate the unbelievable cosmic change of the world. He has no conception of what a world, even in 2021, from the world of 1240, you see. Same idea. See, that we have no conception of what the world will be when the world of Yetzirah, where the presence of God as He manifests Himself in Yetzirah, actually merges together with Asiyah. We have no conception. And God does that, obviously, in a gentle way, or else everybody would die, which is exactly what happened by the giving of the Torah, Matan Torah. Everybody died. And because they experienced that type of nevuah, which was something beyond imagining. Only Moshe Rabbeinu could survive because he was used to experiencing God at that level. You see, but the Jews who experienced God in Matan Torah wasn't, and therefore they all died. The only thing to consider, which is very important, is that God will not do that unless He prepares the Jews. God is not going to give a consciousness to Jews. When most Jews are gone, 11 million Jews are gone. And even today, people, how much really do they know? How much do they know of Torah and so on? We are so far, we are so much lower than what the Jews were, even 200 years ago, and so on. So God will not bring that type of consciousness to people that are completely removed. It's like somebody who has a filthy suit. You cannot bring him in front of the king. You see, it's like Yosef HaTzadik when they took him out of prison. You know, it said they took him, they changed his clothing, gave him a bath and all that, because you can't stand up Pari at the dungeon, at the level of dungeon. See, so that will happen also. Before God can actually do that, they had to give the consciousness of the Moshiach, or the consciousness of the Shekhinah at the level of Yetzirah. You have to elevate the Jews. How is He going to do it? What is really unknown. But I believe that what can serve that purpose is the concept, and I mentioned this many times before, is that each Jew will know and learn Mishnayos Be'iyun. Because if you learn Mishnayos Be'iyun with depth, that is equivalent not only to learning, but to doing, as I mentioned. That learning Mishnayos is equivalent to actually doing it, and so on. And like I mentioned last week, that the word Mishnah itself is the word Neshama, the same letters as the word Neshama. And besides, the word Mishnah means Mishaneh, that there will be a change. To who? To the Neshama. But at what level? So the word Mishnah also has the same concept of Shem Hashem, the name of God, Nun, at the level of the 50th level of the holiness, which is the Orishan, by the way, because that's what the 50th level is, and so on. So this ultimately is basically what's going to happen, and these are the things that have to take place. And right now, when you look at the world, you realize that evil has its due, which means that evil is being given its last reign, its last ascendancy to commit all its evil. And in some way, God is going to turn it around, Keheref Ayin, with the blink of an eye. He will turn it around, and then all of a sudden, the whole Messianic process will move forward again, as it did before. And it stopped, as I mentioned. It will move forward again, and therefore the Jews will be redeemed. Let us hope that this year, which is the Shemitah year, because it says in Sanhedrin that the Mashiach will come, Marova, Mashiach will come in Mitzvah Shemitah, which means right after Shemitah is over, which is next year, basically next year, October, right? So therefore Shemitah is a year of preparation. And I had mentioned also that Elul is a preparation for Rosh Hashanah or Shemitah, you see. So the world is changing in front of our eyes, incredibly so. Very rapid change. So let's hope that this Shemitah will be the year of the preparation, and that the Mashiach will come following year in October. Wouldn't that be great? Tafshin Pei Gimel, right? And that would be the Tiyah Shnas, Psichas Geula. That's Tafshin Pei Gimel. that will begin the opening of the redemption itself. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes.
So now the Gula got pushed off another year.
Well, listen, like I say, I don't charge tax. I just collect it.
All right, as long as it comes already out enough.
Okay, I'm sure. What was that?
Okay, so I have a question. So if this year is the preparation, so then is that the process of Hashem using our oneshamas to get us together? What happens?
Well, before he does that, look, he's not going to put that type of consciousness in a person that will kill him. It killed the Jews who already were prepared because of Egypt, the plagues, the 10 Makkahs, and they were already prepared because of the Kriyas Yamsuf. It still killed them by the time they arrived at Mount Torah, Mount Sinai, right? So how can he do that to people who are 1,000 miles away from what the Jews were at Mount Torah? Therefore, there has to be a tremendous surge forward of the Jews returning to do the mitzvahs, to learn the Torah and to do the mitzvahs. And then they could be spiritually ready, hopefully, to have a change in consciousness. You see.
Right, but how is we going to get all those Jews to start doing the mitzvah if half of them don't even know they're Jewish?
That is basically unknown. But it will happen from V'eshpech Ruchi, and I will pour out my spirit. No, it's not going to happen in a way which we can predict, which can be natural. It has to happen in a supernatural way. Look, the redemption is supernatural because it's a change of the cosmos. It's a cataclysmic event that never happened before. Just like Egypt. Egypt never happened before. Who ever heard of the Nile River turning to blood? The whole thing was supernatural. And the Geula, the redemption, is be much greater supernatural. The redemption is not going to be natural. It may start off in a natural way, but ultimately it's going to be supernatural, just like Egypt. Remember, it says, behold, I will redeem you, the latter one will be like the first. Just like the first was supernatural. It was extraordinary, right? The whole nature was violated again and again. That's what's going to happen with the Messianic approach. Same thing. But it's going to become even greater because the redemption is the greatest moment in the universe. So how it will happen, we don't really know. But it will be supernatural. And because it is supernatural, the Jews will be able to awaken and return.
So this year is going to be the year of supernatural because that's what's going to cause all of us to wake up and turn back to Him.
That is very possible, yes. That is very possible. Correct.
So now the Jews in Matan Torah, they died because they weren't able to accept the level of consciousness of Olam Yetzirah?
No, they were not able to. It's the shock to the system of experiencing God, the way Moshe Rabbeinu experiences God, was overwhelming, and they died. In many ways, it was like Ben Azai. Ben Azai was incredibly great, and he and 3 others went into Paradise. They went into, actually, they had Ruach HaKodesh, and they went into Olam Yetzirah. And Ben Azai was so overcome by the divinity, by the Dveikus, the God, in Olam Yetzirah, he died. That's what happens. When God reveals himself to you in such a way, a person dies. That's how Moshe Rabbeinu died, and Aaron and Miriam, all of them. It's called the Neshika. The Neshika is when God will reveal himself in a way which is beyond the ability of the soul to remain in the physical body. That's what a Neshika is. It's a kiss. A kiss is a metaphor of an incredible ability to experience another being. That's what kissing does, where you experience another being as close as possible, you see. So they died, you see, and we're talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron HaKohen, and even Miriam. They died from the Neshika. In other words, there are levels that we can tolerate, right? So even Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron and Miriam could not tolerate God at the level of Neshika. You see? Now the Jews, who are much lower than that, also could not tolerate when God revealed to them the 2 first mitzvahs of the Torah. You see? So they died, and so on. And they had to be revived. I mean, there are other understandings which I'm not going into, but basically they died. And this was after a preparation of all the supernatural events of Egypt. I mean, they went through the 10 plagues. They went through the Kriyas Yamsuf, splitting the Red Sea. They went through the 49 days getting ready to receive the Torah. And they still died, you see. We, who are 1,000,000 miles away from what they were, everybody would drop dead. You cannot feel that type of presence and live. So at least what God has to do is at least get the Jews to the level of doing mitzvahs, to again believe in God, have emunah bitochen, but to know the Torah, because that's the only way to be able to survive. To be able to withstand the unbelievable tidal wave of kedusha. You see, so that's going to happen. How that happens, we don't know, but that itself will be supernatural. I'll tell you one thing: when it does happen, you will know.
Okay, so when we're going to have Techiyat HaMetim too, and we're all going to die, so are we going to? Is that same process going to happen to us, where we're going to experience the revelation of God, where it's going to come consuming, and then we all die, and then that's when Techiyat HaMetim begins?
Actually, what you're asking is a very good point. It's not clear if everybody dies naturally, or do they die because the experiencing of God is so great, and that's why everybody dies. You see, it's not clear. But that happens after Moshiach ben David, which is after the Beis Hamikdash. It's after Moshiach ben Yosef. It's after the war of Gog, Magog. It's after It's after everything, actually. So that's not clear. What causes the death? You see, but they have to die to be able to get rid of the zoyama in the physical body. And they die, and they lie for 2 hours, and then they get up with a new body without zoyama. You see.
So that's technically in 8 years from now.
Well, could be. Could be less.
Oh, it could be less.
Yes, it could be less.
Techiyat takes 210 years.
What was that?
Didn't we say that Techiyat HaMetim takes 210 years?
Yes, once it begins, it takes 210 years to unfold until the last person gets up.
Right.
Yes.
So now, does your level of revelation of God during this process, is it according to your the way you kept Judaism throughout your life and kept mitzvah, or does everyone get the same amount of revelation of Hashem and the Shekhinah?
Can you repeat that?
Okay. When Hashem does reveal himself through Olam Yetzirah into this world, does everyone get the same revelation at the same level, or are people who are more religious and more observant, they get more of a revelation than a person who wasn't?
I would imagine that it's different. Because everything is based on the level of religiosity of a person. Even if it's not Olam Haba, for instance, Gan Eden. Gan Eden is not Olam Haba. Gan Eden really is Olam Yetzirah. But everybody there is receiving the reward in the same proportion as their religiosity. So therefore, when they do, but there's a certain minimum. So therefore, over here, by when people do receive in the Messianic era, it'll be probably the same thing. But there will be a minimum, of experiencing God. But probably people who are devoted their lives much greater to religiosity will, I'm sure, experience God in a greater way. You see.
So when you gave the pasuk that Hashem is going to circumcise the heart, and then through that the Ruach is going to come, and then we're going to be able to experience Him. You said that He's going to remove the blockages first, and He's going to remove the Zohama.
Yes, that's right.
But didn't we say that part is after? Because Techiyat HaMetim basically is when we remove the Zohama. But we isn't that after we already experienced the Ruach?
Well, what's interesting is that you can remove Zohama. I mean, you can remove a certain amount of Zohama. That's why you have the concept called the mikveh, because that removes what's called surface Zohama. That's really what Tumah is.
But I thought you have to die to remove the Zohama.
What was that?
I thought you have to die to remove the Zohama.
Yeah, you have to. Let's look at it this way. Every human has Zohama. It's integrated into the physical world, into your flesh. Okay? So that's what's called the major concentration. That cannot be removed until death. However, there is a thing called surface Zohama, and that is Tumah. That Tumah can be removed with the mikveh, you see, or the paraduma. So what's going to happen is, you're going to have a removal, on the surface, but the real removal, the complete removal of the Zohama will happen later on. You see. So there are different stages of removal of Zohama. You see.
So this year could be the beginning of the removal of the Zohama?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. Look, it has to happen at a certain time. And when it does happen, it's supernatural. We're not looking at an ordinary event. And I believe it'll happen as soon as evil has its due, which means right now evil claims, the Kitrugim prosecutions claim, hey, the Jews sinned tremendously, and therefore we have a right to dominate. So God says, fine. So we are watching incredible evil dominate. I mean, just take a look what happened recently with Afghanistan. We now have the possibility where all the terror organizations are now rejuvenated. I mean, they're all celebrating, whether it be Iran, right, whether it be North Korea,
China,
right, China and Russia. They're going wild. Because they see this as an incredible, strengthening
victory
of their ability to destroy the world or to dominate the world. So the world has now entered, because of this guy Biden, the world has now entered a much worse state of evil where they can really harm people, So it's not just Afghanistan, slaughter the Afghanis. What they're going to do is now they can come to America and pull off another 9/11. And so on. I mean, we have not even begun to see what Biden has unleashed on the world. That's why what he did is catastrophic. But putting Biden aside and his administration, the real concept is that evil has now grown tremendously in its ability to dominate and to destroy. And this is all part of the kitrug, the prosecution against, the world and the Jewish people. So that has to be satisfied, like one said. Justice has to be satisfied. Once it's satisfied, it's immediately destroyed. God does not play around with evil. He gives it its due. He gives it what it deserves because of the sins of the Jewish people. Then as soon as they are satisfied, justice, he immediately annihilates, obliterates, eradicates evil. But we don't know when that. We do not know when that time is. You see, but it's coming. Just hang in there.
So, Rabbi, I have a
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
So, is it possible that we sort of got a glimpse or a little? You said that maybe something started to happen, and then we got set back. And if that happened, then is it possible that we had some sort of an experience?
What experience do you refer to?
When you were saying that it seemed like the Geula was starting a little bit, and then maybe we got a setback.
Yeah.
And now it's not really where.
So I don't understand what your point is. What was that?
So what was it that we experienced when the Geula was starting?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I mean, why did I say? Because the answer to that is Trump. Because Esav does tshuva in the end. It's not Trump. It's Esav, which I have a whole shurim on that. That Esav in the end does tshuva, and he returns to being Rav Ya'avoy Tzoya, the old who will serve the younger. And therefore God allows him, because he almost did tshuva, to assist Yaakov, to do tshuva, and so on. And that's exactly what Trump did. He restored major portions of Israel to the Jewish people. And then he was kicked out. So the process really begins in many ways with Trump. Because the process I mentioned begins because the world has become incredibly defiled and degraded, which I mentioned because of the Supreme Court's decision that gender, you cannot discriminate against gender, so we're looking at the Mabul all over again. I've given shurim on this, so it's all recorded. But that's what I meant.
So, Rabbi,
Okay.
you wanted me to remind you of to tell the audience what to pray for on Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah. So I gave a Rosh Hashanah shir, and what the gist of that shir is that it's an evaluation of the tikkun process, and therefore that tells you what to pray for. You see, it's not that God is judging you personally, which He is, but that's because you contribute to the advancement of the tikkun process. But the real concept is the tikkun process. God has to decide how to advance that, the rectification of creation, and each of us plays a part. So, therefore, the major prayer that you have to say is not so much, well, please God, give me long life and give me parnasa and health and shalom bayis, and my kids, nachas and so on. Those are personal wishes. What really could or should influence God is where you say, let me, please, give me the wherewithal to advance the agenda of God, to advance tikkun. That's really what's in consideration on Rosh Hashanah. You see, it's not that you're asking for something personal, but you are asking that you should have all these good things, and that they will enable you to do the tikkun process, which is the purpose of God. It's the agenda. Now that's a winning argument. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would recommend, so that's the first argument that you should present. And it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's essential, because that's what happens on Rosh Hashanah. The second thing is where you would say to Ribono Shel Olam, please, do not look at my sins, do not look at my mitzvahs. Don't look at any of my merits or demerits at all. Just look at me and you love me. And just based on that love, let me be able to survive and flourish, and it should be a great year. Just because you love me and I love you. So you're not asking God to give you a good year because of your merits, your mitzvahs. Because, what mitzvahs do we really have? And what happens if they're insufficient? So the way to do this is to say to the Ribono Shel Olam, please, don't look at anything. Do not look at, any type of, like I say, merits or demerits, mitzvahs or sins. Just look at the fact that you love me, because that's what you say. Because God, your God, loves you, and I love you, and give me the wherewithal to serve you, right? And to, in some way, advance the whole process of tikkun. And you could say whatever you want, that God should give you the ability to bring other Jews back, or to help other Jews, but more specifically, to promote the existence and the belief in God throughout the world, or throughout your neighborhood, or your friends, your family, and so on. And that would seem to be the most convincing argument that you could present to God, both of these ideas. You see?
Beautiful.
That's what I would say. But remember, the reason why I say that is because it's based on what Rosh Hashanah is really all about. That's the mistake that people make. The greatest argument is when you say, let me advance your agenda. You see, let me advance your agenda. Because it's very interesting. Many times a person does not deserve to live, for whatever reason. But God lets him live. You know why? Because God sees that he could bring Jews back. He can advance the tikkun process. And in the end, that's the major emphasis of God, is that the tikkun, that the world should be rectified. So he will actually give life to somebody, right, that really doesn't deserve to live. But because this person is in concert with the tikkun process, which is the agenda or objective of God, God gives him life. And more than that, he allows him to flourish. In other words, what you're doing is you are putting the interest of God before your own. And that's the argument you're using to be able to survive and flourish and have all kinds of simcha in your life. You see what I'm saying? And you can only do that because you understand what Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is really all about.